What do you define yourself as? You mentioned filmmaker, writer. Talk to me a little bit about how you identify as in your professional life.
I mean, I'm a writer both of like screenplays and also of, essays and articles and hopefully a book eventually or books. And and then I'm a director and a producer as well. So I use filmmaker in a broad sense.
Mhm.
And my work like involves television now, film, and a lot of digital content as well, music videos, commercials, scripted, unscripted. So it really is quite a gamut of work. And honestly, those projects vary based on how they were originated, how they came together, what I was commissioned to do, what I pitched for.
Mhm.
So,
Is it under
yeah.
an umbrella like a certain company, or is it Honcho, or is it something else?
So I have a production company called Honto 88.
88.
And
Mhm.
so I started that really as I found myself producing a lot more than I expected to right out of grad school at NYU, where I got my MFA in film at Tisch and my MBA at Stern. And I can see why I was producing so much. Um, and I was also an executive, and I'd been at MTV and Condé Nast and then Nylon. And then while I was still producing, I really was like, I have stuff I want to write about. There's stuff I want to direct, but I'm not getting those opportunities as much. And, I have to reframe things for myself. And that's really where Honto came about.
Mm.
And so Honto 88 was really a vehicle for my directing, but where my work would also live within one production company instead of constantly being commissioned from different sources
Mm.
or being commissioned to direct and then going to another company. So that's really why I started it. And then more recently started Prism Entertainment with Megha Kadakia and Priya Giri Desai, who are two filmmakers whose work I have loved and respected for so long. And during the pandemic, the three of us just got on a Zoom call to chat, and we were all complaining about, projects that we were brought on, that had South Asian representation. And we realized that we were also being just tokenized and being brought on to fix problems that were poorly developed because
Mm.
people involved may not have necessarily had that cultural background either. And, we were just band-aids to a wound. And we were finding this across our various projects. And then really, I think through that complaining, we had to figure out a solution. And our solution was, why don't the three of us come together to start a company and collect IP, start to do this in a different way, have a different intention. And I think it's almost like an anti-Hollywood move where we did not want to make a big announcement. We were not chasing a trade paper to suddenly say, here we are. We wanted to be very intentional. Also, the three of us hadn't worked together before. And so we really wanted to take our time, build a slow slate, tap into our networks or communities um, in a way that, and all three of us have to be on the same page
Mhm.
around something too. And
Sure.
we have various backgrounds and perspectives. And so I think we've been able to build a really wonderful slate of projects across the board, and we're really excited. And so in that, with Prism, I mean, that tends to be more culturally specific, but operating at a different scale.
Sure. Why the name Honcho 88?
Oh, so Honto 88,
Honto, sorry, Honto 88. Yeah.
although, I guess everyone who works there should be called Honcho 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
So actually, funny enough, I think a lot of companies, what I found, their names tend to be from the places or streets where they were birthed.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so when I was thinking about what company name could I have, so much of my creative work was really coming from my Chinatown apartment
Mm.
in downtown New York. And a friend of mine was like, "Wait, isn't your condo building called Honto 88?" And I thought, "Yeah, but what does that mean?" And I looked up Honto, and I believe in Chinese, Honto refers to living life to the fullest. And but then in Japanese, Honto means really. And I thought that that was just so funny that you have this very practical word that I tend to actually say a lot. And then you had this other kind of very like earnest,
Yeah.
thing. And then 88 is the symbol of infinite good luck in a lot of Asian culture. And so I thought, you know what, being in Chinatown, being in this place also means so much to me. It's where a lot of my creativity has also been, birthed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why Honto 88. And then Prism Entertainment, Prism comes from our names. The Pri is from Priya, the S is from Shruti, and the M is from Mega.
Oh, that's good. Wow. That's a really my brother used to work for a naming company up in the Bay Area and they named, the Power Book and all these other, Lexus and just really, really large brands. And, you always picture people just sitting in a room with like, a whiteboard or something like that or a blackboard or something. And he's like, oh, there's so much that goes into it. I'm always fascinated by names and how people come up with them. That's really cool, the Prism piece. How do you feel as you move through the world? I mean, you're someone who uh, loves the topic of identity. It's come up a number of times already in this conversation, one of the themes. And, it's a kind of a weird question to ask or answer, but like, how do you feel as you move through the world? Like I feel like a man, I feel like an Indian, I feel like an American. There's so many different things. I'm a Pisces. I don't really identify much as a Pisces, even though I am. What are the ones that resonate with you about yourself where you're going, yeah, that's primarily what I lead with?
I mean, that's a great question because I think, it's interesting when you grow up in a place that where you're not from, in terms of the, culture, the dominant religion, you're an expat. I think there's you have the capacity to kind of really find, a certain comfort in home where you are, and you kind of land and absorb. I don't know how to describe it, but I used this analogy with some friends the other day. So perhaps it's this. It's
Mm,
not necessarily how I move through life, but maybe my general attitude. And unfortunately, I will say the lotus flower seems to have been co-opted by the very right-wing Hindu government in India right now. But I do think that, like a lotus, you are floating in a river, but you do have roots.
mm,
And the roots can attach to different banks or branches or places where it needs to find a place at that moment. But then, when the currents change, it's going to move again. So I
mm,
think my way of moving in the room has a sense of openness. And I'm not necessarily thinking about myself, really. I'm just, in terms of my identity in those moments, I'm going and I'm actually really kind of absorbing and then reacting based on where those conversations or those interactions lie. Because I'm reacting based on how someone is perceiving me. And I know who I am,
mm,
but it's like, but I'm not necessarily in that moment, like, being like, I'm South Asian, I'm a woman, I'm this. I'm really just a person in the world in this moment right now.
yeah, that's
I
good.
mean, but it'll be somebody else who'll remind me of my gender,
Mm,
frankly,
mm,
unless I'm on my period. It'll be someone else who'll tell me, like, you know, like say something that makes me self-conscious about the color of my skin,
mm,
you
mm,
know?
mm. It'll come externally as opposed to something that you're
Yeah.
bringing in internally. Uh, Tell me about a nightmare client or a hell gig that you've had. Names are optional.
I mean, I just remember I was asked to produce a project in China and then direct a project in India for a
Mm,
huge brand. And there were these short docs. And it was for a Women's Day, International Women's Day campaign. And I was tasked with doing a short doc as the director in India on a young Muslim woman based near Hyderabad who was a martial arts expert and was doing I think it was Taekwondo and was like a double black belt or something like
mm,
that, and was also training. And that was the feature. And I had been asked to, get and find her, to get that process started. And I was so excited about her
yeah.
telling her story. And I very quickly found her. And I remember actually reaching out to a filmmaker who had done a short or had done another project that she had been involved in. And now I was doing this branded piece, and that filmmaker was very upset that I was doing this and refused to give me the girl's information, sadly. But I could understand there's some people who, I mean, look, I was not the one who pick this person. I was just doing my job. But I then, was able to get in contact with this young woman. She was so excited about it. And then I got told by the brand, as we were like putting the logistics together of the planning, I booked my ticket. We had budgeted for this entire thing. Our shoot was already in production in China. And my colleague, Rachel, who was in China producing it at the time, had told me, like, hey, Shruti, there's some virus outbreak that everyone's talking about here, but I'm not, so I'm still, I was thinking of staying for a few more days, but I'm going to change my flight. And I was like, sure, get out of there, whatever you're saying. And then in the meantime, I'm about to fly to India and I get told by the brand, we don't want to do that girl's story anymore. Like there's been a direction shift and we, want to do someone else. And I was like, you have made me reach out to this young Muslim girl who's doing martial arts and she's training it as a matter of self-defense in a time where Muslims and Muslim women are really feeling, you know,
Attacked.
are feeling attacked. And I, with my Hindu name, even though I'm like half Hindu, is I'm essentially going to be the messenger to tell this girl that her story is not important. And I don't want to do that. That's horrible. I said, this goes against everything that your campaign is about. It goes against everything I do. And with your permission, whatever we decide to do together or not, I want to tell her story because I don't want her to feel like her story doesn't matter. Now, whether you run it or not, that's fine, but I will make a film for her. And they weren't sure about it. I mean, I was going to do it anyway. But then that thing called the pandemic had happened. And I wasn't going to be traveling for the next several months anyway. And,
Yeah.
that became the reason for why it didn't continue. But I remember just here is a brand that, continuously builds campaigns around these things. And I felt like it was real smoke and mirrors because I was going through this experience and I was like, you guys are full of shit.
Yeah. That's maybe that was God's way of descending and saying, well, I'm going to save Shruti from this, like she's done such a good job of like carrying the spirit on. She's going to tell the story. You know what? I'm going to let you out of this. We're going to, some people
Yeah.
may be affected, but we're
and
going to
and,
get
and
you out
you're
of this.
she also and it was God's way of saying like, look, I'm going to send a pandemic so you can get stuck in Oslo and spend the most time with your husband than you've ever had.
You guys are still together. That's good. Not
That was
everybody
it.
made it, dude. Not everybody made it. Oh my gosh, that's definitely good. Do you have a great story, something involving preferably a celebrity? I'm sure you've got to have some good stories.
Oh gosh, how many names do you want me to drop?
Like, just this is the section of the interview where you could just drop names like bombs. Just go to town.
Oh God. So I'll never forget this friend of mine, Maria Zuckerman, was on the jury of Tribeca one year, and she said, "Shroots, why don't you come to the opening screening with me? It's a incredible documentary about music and human rights." I said, "Oh, it sounds perfect." And then she said, "Oh, actually, there's an opening party just before cocktail, just before that, because De Niro is being given the keys to the city." And I was like, "Cool," even though it's by a mayor I don't like or respect very much, Eric Adams. So I went with Maria to this event and I ran into a lot of friends I knew, and I ran into Janet Yang, who's the president of the Academy. And, Janet was chatting with us and I said, "Oh gosh, there's Brendan Fraser." And she's like, "Oh, do you want to say hi to him? Let me bring him over." So she brings him over. So we're just chatting with Brendan Fraser and his
With the
very
whale.
lovely son.
Yeah.
He had just won for the whale.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, wait, is that Matt Damon? It was a small room of like
Gosh.
it was like 60 people at this thing. It was not big. And Jenna's like, "Oh, there's Matt. Let's go say hi to him." And she grabs me. We go just chat with him. And then, we lose each other because we run into other friends. And then she comes back and is like, "Shruti, I've heard you know Julian Schnabel," which is not really true, but we have common friends. And so she dragged me. She's like, "You have to introduce me to Julian Schnabel." And I was like, okay. Literally, this woman can go say hi to everybody because
Yeah,
everyone
right.
knows who she is.
Right.
But I love that Janet's asking me to do this for her. So we're walking around and there's no sign of Julian, but who is standing there but Kenneth Lonergan, the playwright and filmmaker, and Mark Ruffalo. And, she's like, "Janet Yang." And I was like, "Oh, Kenneth, Mark." And then I say, hello to them. Janet introduces me. And then at that moment, Scorsese is walking by and he's like, "Kenny, Mark." And they're like, "Marty." And they like hug each other. And he's like, "Hey, Marty." I was like, "Hi, Shruti." And, he's walking away. And then Mark Ruffalo looks at me and is like, "I know you." And I said, Yes, about, I don't know, 11 years ago, right out of grad school, I directed some videos for the Brain Tumor Foundation, and I made a video with you
Wow.
about, and he said, I remember that video. I remember our shoot.
No way.
And yeah, I mean, it was a little video, and it was the first time I guess he was telling his story, um, and he said that video changed my life, and I totally remembered it, and he sent me such a sweet message, about my approach, that he had been scared to share his story with the world at that time. Even then he was already playing the Hulk. Um, and I remember in the message, he was like, your kindness and your compassion made it really easy for me to open up. And I hadn't seen him, been in touch with him. And then 11 years later, in a crowded room with a lot of recognizable people in this very funny context, he's like, I remember you. He's like, why do I know you? And it's been so nice because, we've been able to reconnect as friends, and that's been wonderful. So that's like a celeb story, but I think, someone like, it's wonderful that the entertainment business gets to have people like Mark Ruffalo in the world because, he's a real one.
That's amazing. I mean, I listened to this podcast called The Rewatchables, and they do spotlight in it. And one of the comments they make is this should not be a rewatchable movie. It's such a heavy topic, but because of the acting in it, the writing, the way the story is told, it is a movie I've seen maybe 4 or 5 times. I mean, I was watching The Founder yesterday again with Michael Keaton. I just have movies on in the background sometimes. I love Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson. If you ever meet Jack Nicholson, he's my one guy that I want to meet. So, but did you meet De Niro then?
I feel like I've met De Niro before, but not, I don't think I met him that night. Yeah.
What a good problem to have. You're like, oh, Bobby, yeah. Like I think Bobby and Joe, like we talked to them for a while, but yeah, Marty, it's just I don't know if it was that night. We had a lot going on. I was talking to Mark, so Mark and Matt. That's amazing. Wow. Super, super cool stuff.